We'll give it just a couple more minutes. Please feel free to keep chatting. Today is among the longest set of readings in the whole church year. The long Valley of Dry Bones in the Gospel. It's even 2 pages in the big Gospel book. It takes a very long time. I forgot. I was like, why does the 8 o'clock service? It's not out at 8:40 like it always is, because the readings go so long. So people will keep joining us. After a great week with Danny Schiff, Rabbi, talking about religion and the new digital age, as he calls it, as well as AI and other things. Then it was the dedication of the Fred Rogers window. So now we finally get to back to the Exodus class. And I wanted to try to keep a couple class times together because this is the presentation by Yahweh of the 10 Commandments to the people. So this is a crucial piece in the whole Exodus story. Everybody calls this in English, in America, the 10 Commandments. Guess what they call it in Hebrew or the Jewish world specifically? Are they commandments? The 10 sayings or utterances or even words. They specifically do not, Judaism does not call them commandments, which is weird that Christians call them commandments. Mitzvah or mitzvot would be the word for commandment. You've heard of mitzvah day as like a good work or commandment day. They are not the 613 specific commandments. This is a much bigger category. These are what it means to live in relationship and covenant relationship with Yahweh. They're foundational principles rather than 10 specific rules to follow. It doesn't say, it says thou shalt not, it doesn't say don't. In Hebrew, there is an absolute economy of words, which is very, very easy to see in Hebrew. In fact, it's 4 consonants with a negative. Don't steal. We would translate probably easiest as don't steal, don't envy, don't murder. It's meant to be concise, terse even. So it depends on interpretation. What I hope for us to be able to think about is, everybody in here, maybe one person whose name I will mention, is probably old enough that you had, I was in public school, the 10 Commandments was hanging on every classroom I had, up on the wall. And you would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and there'd be 10 Commandments. You didn't say them, but they were there. That is a really interesting way of conceiving kind of Western moral tradition or so-called Judeo-Christian ethics. These are much, much more foundational than that. And how often, at least in my experience in Protestant America, how these are interpreted is not how they would have been interpreted or have been interpreted within Judaism. The first one, for example, I am the Lord your God. That's what all Americans have heard. But imagine if you heard it as it was written, I am Yahweh, your God. It suddenly sounds very different. It's a specific thing. Remember, too, the book, what's the book of Exodus in Hebrew? What does the name mean? We call it Exodus, the event that it describes. In Hebrew, it's usually the first few lines or first few words, the significant words. The name, it's called the names. This whole book is called the names. This is it's an extension of the book of Genesis, just the next continuation of it, the sequel. And so this is all the story of what God's been doing since the beginning with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph and Egypt and all the rest. This is just one continuing story. And so remember to think of it in that context as well. It's not just plucked out and stuck up on a wall somewhere. It's the story of a specific God and people that certainly has universal applicability, but all that is in there. So last time, you may remember, Yahweh says to Moses and Aaron, prepare the people. And they've approached Mount Sinai, the holy mountain, where Moses meets God. And now, in case there's any doubt, because, I could tell you stuff as that, well, God told me as the rector. And you could take my word for it, or I guess he knows, he prays a lot, we think. At least he pretends to pray a lot. And God speaks to him. Really? And, you got to take it on good faith. In this scene, it's meant to remove any doubt. God speaks to everybody that's there around the mountain. And there are all these ways to prepare because the holiness of Yahweh is so overpowering that it will kill people if they go about it the wrong way. So they're not to approach the mountain too close. Any human or animal would be killed. Remember, there's all this racket. There are ram's horns sounding. There's thunder. There's lightning. There's fire. All this stuff going on. The people are to be purified. And then they receive what we read today, what we call the Ten Commandments. God, after all the craziness goes on at the mountain, everybody's listening. The mist break apart, and God's voice comes from presumably the heavens, but everyone, it's audible. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God. I am Yahweh your God. Remember, and it doesn't capitalize it here, but where there's capitalized letters, usually in lowercase caps, in the prayer book, L-O-R-D, that means Yahweh, translated as Lord. It's been translated that way since very early on. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. That is the big one that sets the stage for everything else. So it's just us, I, Yahweh, and you as my people. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Anybody remember how it's often translated when it's up on the wall? Graven images. What the heck? I thought for the longest time as a kid, graven meant really horrible and scary. What does graven mean? Engraved, carved. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven or above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation. Are we still in the second one? Yes, this is still the second commandment. 3, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, is how some version of that. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. This is another really long one. It has been written about, particularly within Judaism, that originally all of these, as I mentioned, were very, very short. A few were just 4 letters and then one more letter to make it negative. And then this was added about the Sabbath day, for example. And when you hear Jews talk about the Sabbath, what word do they use? In Hebrew, it's Shabbat. So if you're Shabbat, Sabbath, same thing. You shall not make wrongful use. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, but the 7th is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and so on. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land the Lord has been giving you. You shall not murder. This is the section of the 4 letters. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. I'll point out several things when we get to this. Why is house before the wife of coveting? Little awkward, I might say. You shall not covet. And just in case you thought, I really like his bank account, or he's got some nice camels in his garage, it lists all the major things that you might see another person has. So all the 10 finish. When all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, the mountain smoking, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance and said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen. So after they heard it, But do not let God speak to us or we will die. That's too much. Plus, these 10 are plenty. We don't need any more stuff. Moses said to the people, which is what is all throughout the Bible when there's an encounter with the Holy, do not be afraid, because it's terrifying to be. I'm going to preach about that at Easter. The women that went to the empty tomb run away with fear and great joy. Those two emotions together. And it doesn't say that here, but one can imagine fear and great joy. We're scared to death about what this means, because everything in the past, it's still important, but it's all different going forward. That's what is happening here. Do not be afraid, for God has come only to test you and to put the fear of Him, which in this case means respect, so that you do not sin. Or I'm coming down there. There's a little bit of that threat promise all throughout these. So this is the ultimate proof of Yahweh's presence and power. If you didn't believe it before, here is God speaking it, God's self, to everybody, in front of everybody, with all these witnesses. I am the Lord your God, Yahweh Elohim. What does Elohim mean? God. If you see, so Elohim is used, it's like 2,500 some odd times in the Bible. Yahweh, it's over and over and over, and often it's God or Lord. We get some version of those two. Note that suddenly Moses stops being the intermediary, but that's been his role the whole time. We would call that triangulation, perhaps. Intermediary. Okay, you got something to say. Okay, now let me go here and communicate it back and forth. Oh my gosh. And then it's this back and forth, and then how it becomes direct. I am the Yahweh your God instead of Lord your God. It's self-confessional. This I, and what does the name Yahweh mean, remember? I am, or I will be who I will be. So I am self-defining. I define everything else. The great I am, just a fantastic name. This is followed by the self-giving phrase, I am the Lord your God, I am who I am. Who, how do I define what I do? Who did what? Brought you out of the land of Egypt. What were they in Egypt? I am who I am. And who were you before we got together? Slaves. Now you're free people. And so the whole relationship we have is based on liberation and coming out of this slavery and what it means to be a new people. So this isn't just any God. This is your God, the one who freed you. Just so we're clear about that, I don't have any other covenant people, by the way. I don't have people on the side. This is, you're the only ones that I'm married to. There is, by the way, I'll save that when we get to jealousy. I'm the one who delivers. I'm the one who redeems. And just what does redeem mean in a biblical context? Remind me. To buy back, to release from slavery. So the Redeemer of Israel is Yahweh, who buys them out of slavery, takes them out of slavery. You had no status or rank before. I mean, who were you people before? You were slaves. Yeah, I went back with your people way, but you got caught up in all this stuff, out of the house. You were nobody, now you're somebody. And to say it, this particular translation, I brought you out of the house of slavery, kind of misses, you were nobodies and now you're somebodies. And your somebodies partly in a relationship to me. And you could say the whole Bible, particularly the Hebrew Bible, is about that, of what it means to be in relationship with Yahweh. You became free to be someone, not just do whatever you want, but to be in loving covenantal relationship with Yahweh. and a light to the Gentiles, a light to the world. Like, you have a job to do now that you're a free people. So it's from the very beginning of these 10 Commandments defining what your job is, your role, your mission is how we'd probably say it. So if you've got a mission statement, that's what they should be putting at the top. Your job is to be covenant people in relationship. The 10 Commandments are not meant to cover every possible category. They're also not, they're specific kind of, but they're, again, the general operating principles based on that first one. Made in person by Yahweh, or made by God to this people. And we say them in church sometimes, these 10 Commandments. What season of the this is a really easy one. What season of the church year do we often say the 10 Commandments? Now, during Lent. So it was in fact, that was just good timing. I thought the case, if we kept having enough guest speakers, we would get to Lent before we could have this class, and in fact, we did. It used to be that we would say the 10 Commandments much more often, and if you've been to what are often called colonial churches, Christ Church, Old Town Alexandria, probably Bruton Parish, a few others, will have the 10 Commandments and the Lord's Prayer and maybe the Creed on a tablet up on the wall. That was a very common way to decorate, or adorn is a better word, adorn Episcopal churches in the 18th and 17th centuries. Not all the stuff we have. That's a Middle Ages and then 19th century concept to do it that way. Often they're called, in the prayer book, they're called the Decalogue. Remind me what the Decalogue is. 10 words. So the 10 words like biologos and so on. This is the very impressive one, if you know this. What was the Septuagint? That's where we get that term from. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Old Testament from 3rd to 1st century BC, so right before the time of Jesus and a couple hundred years before. Why in the world would they translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek? It'd be very similar to translating the Hebrew Bible into English, because that's the main language that everybody knew broadly in that area. So the lingua franca doesn't even do it. It's what everybody knew. Commerce and so on. You shall have no other gods before me. Again, notice, are all gods the same? No. Does it assume in that culture that there are lots of different gods existing? Roman ones, this Babylonian, this culture, that, yeah. But this is our God. And Cameron had a good thought in there today when the so-called Babylonian exile. If two, you wouldn't call them nations, two tribes, two countries of whatever type were fighting, what's also symbolic of whose side is God on, or our God is more powerful than your God, or my dad can beat up your dad, and so it's your faith is stronger if you won, clearly you had the better God. And so that there's some of that stuff going on there as well. Your relationship with Yahweh is your highest priority. That lays it out. And there are lots of other gods, but this relationship, this is the defining feature of your life now. Do the people have a choice in this? Not if you want to be a Hebrew. Not really is how I would have said it. You can decide not to be a Hebrew, which is, they weren't Jewish yet. You can decide not to be Hebrew, but if you're going to be Hebrew, this is what that means. And again, part of the reason it took so long in the desert is to get out the slavery, to get out the pagan ideas, to this is who you're going to be. Now when you're ready, then you can go into the promised land. Other people can have other gods, but if you're in this family, the Israelites, this is what's happening. So, one of my favorites, the second commandment, you shall not make for yourself any idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down and worship them, and so on and so on. Usually don't make for yourself a graven image. So the first commandment is faithfulness to God alone. The second commandment is about idols, and the third and fourth set up expectations for how you'll be in relationship with Yahweh. Firstly, you shall not use any images in the worship of Yahweh. Do we do that in the Episcopal Church? Or Catholic Church, or Luther, or Christianity? Yeah, a lot. One of the easiest ways is to go look at any synagogue, and if they have stained glass, look at the stained glass, and then look at the stained glass in a Christian church. It's not even remotely the same thing. In synagogue, it'll be colors or patterns, but here, in Christian churches, it's people, Jesus, for example, represented. So graven image means a carved idol. Why would that be the second commandment? What's the big concern about having a carved image of the divine? You could mistake it for the true God. That's true. It really means, I think, Steve?
For me, it's something made by man. How can it be a God if it's made by man?
How can it be a God or divine if it's made by people? Yes, that's also true. People had, when I was a kid, I had little army, soldiers, or you have, girls would have dolls, but boys would have action figures, which looks just like a doll, like a G.I. Joe or a whatever, but you have representations of people or things to play with. In this case, it's specifically talking about some carving, and you would have a carving of a bull or a deity, and that was the representation there. And so you're not allowed to flirt with another woman, or God in this case. You can't even look at them, and you definitely can't have representations of any other deity. And so anything that's not God, don't be messing with that, because this Yahweh is so holy, so they wouldn't say pure, but other, that don't try to mistake anything for that. You'll be going down the wrong path. This is flirting with other gods to have that. Now, it's very likely that Yahweh here and elsewhere made explicitly clear, don't ever mistake me for anybody else. That message is just beaten into them over and over in the desert. I'm Yahweh. Hey, remember all the stuff I did for you? This, and again, is very transactional relationship. This is not loving, unconditional stuff. I brought you out of slavery. You're hungry and thirsty. I gave you bread from heaven and quail to eat and purified water and made water flow out of the rock. And you have snakes coming, and I got rid of the snakes. And you had a tummy ache, and I fixed your tummy ache. And it's basically that over and over and over. And so don't flirt with any other god. We have graven images, but do we have idols in worship? No, it's a very different thing. However, do we have idols instead of the Lord as the highest priority in our life? Do we have any other thing else we put as the highest priority in our lives? Riches, power. I mean, that pretty much covers it, but you add a bunch of specifics to that. Security, status. If you're an addict, probably drugs or alcohol or whatever that thing might be, that's really what, for us, this would be talking about, these, particularly the first two. I love this line, and I remember hearing about this my whole life. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Why in the world would God self-describe? Does anybody in here want a jealous spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend? No, I want you to trust me. Steve?
This always, for probably 60 years, this has bothered me. But not so much, I don't want a jealous God, but what
There's no reason for God to be jealous, except, let's say God is faithful, but are the people. I mean, if as the story goes on, oh my God, I just gave you oh me, I guess God would say, I just gave you the 10 Commandments, and like 5 minutes later, Moses goes away and you make a golden calf. What the heck, guys? And you run off here, and then, oh, what's going to happen to us? You act like none of it's real, or like we never said I loved you. That's the case over and over and over. By the way, if you've never read the Old Testament prophet Hosea, the biblical book of Hosea, the whole thing is about that. Hosea is married to a woman named Gomer. Gomer is a serial adulterer. It is the most fantastic soap opera that is made into a biblical book that you could find. And so she goes after this, he's the bad boy. I'm going to chase him for a while. Hosea's like, okay, come back. And then she chases the rich guy, and then she chases the artsy guy. And it's over and over and over. And the whole thing is a metaphor for Israel is unfaithful to Yahweh, and Yahweh, keeps taking her back. That is a very common theme. Just for the sake of discussion, because I know everybody in here knows, but in case somebody else doesn't, what's the difference between jealousy and envy? Those are often used interchangeably in English. Envy, do not envy your neighbor's stuff, house, wife, etc. I envy his money or her money or looks or status. I want what that person has. Jealousy involves a third person. So I'm jealous because this guy is going out with that girl that I'd like to, and I'm trying to get it. There's always a third party involved in jealousy. So envy is a thing, and jealousy involves that third party. So anybody that's not God, God is jealous of if it's taking your attention away from God. That's the basic idea of that. It still bothers me to this day, because what does God have to be jealous of? Well, the people don't act faithful. Over and over and over. In fact, rarely are they faithful in the biblical story ever. How many good people, if you have a son or daughter, how many people we've read about in the entire book of Genesis or Exodus would you want your son or daughter to marry? I don't have one. Anybody? Not one name comes to mind. Well, this guy's got a lot of sheep and goats, but he's a jerk, or she's that. There's not that many people. So God, Yahweh, is a jealous God. The concern is loyalty to people, the Israelites, to the covenant, and that therefore God is a jealous God. Steve?
Would it be blasphemous to substitute annoyed to jealous?
It would definitely not be blasphemous. It would be clever and kind of funny. And so instead of jealous, to say God is an annoyed God.
Yeah, because to me, that's what you just explained. Look, I just did all this to these people, and still they're making idols. I'm annoyed.
Yes. Annoyed, cross. Wheezy Wells would say cross. She never would say angry. Oh, Jonathon, you must be very cross. Yeah, and I'm mad too. It's like, yes. What another thing to just note about all this, when Christians talk about God, it's almost a step removed. There's a little sweetness to it. There's supposed to be thoughtful, forgiving, merciful love. But the God of the Old Testament is not just cranky and mean, an old man in the sky, etc. God is much more human, or you could say anthropologically assigned attributes than the God, because the God, not just of the New Testament, but God of Christianity, is Greek thought, at least Greek thought, married with Hebrew thought. The Old Testament is much more Hebrew thought without the Greek added in of what is the perfect, the good, the beautiful, and all those other higher attributes and so on. So it comes off as much more homey, human, this type of God. So in the emotions, does God have emotions? Say that again. Anger, love, etc. In this, you could say, well, yes. But another way to think of it is, God is so completely other, we have no way of describing the divine. And so what we have best is using human attributes to say what God is like. So is Yahweh really jealous? I don't know, but this is a way to describe God wants you to be completely faithful to God in the covenant relationship, and that's the best way we have to understand that. And even the God, what we talk about in the New Testament, is God a human being? Well, we believe God became incarnate in the flesh and a human being, and we say he was without sin. Those are ways, it's not a math equation. It's a way of describing something which is indescribable. It's a way of giving flesh and bones and color to something that we can just hint at, and these are the best ways we have of doing that. So try not to let God is jealous or angry or whatever throw you. Well, that's how would you describe grandma died to your children who are 5 and 12? What do you say? Do you talk to them like they're a PhD in biology? How would you describe that? You get simpler, I'm guessing. You have to use things they can understand and things you would understand and compare it to something else. And you're not describing probably a biological reality. You're describing a change in relationship, a change in status, a way of talking about it that makes sense to them. That's what the Bible largely is. You going to say something? I could tell you're ready to ask something, Michael.
That we, Christianity has other gods in a way that Judaism, in its stress, and Judaism has other gods. The first commandment, there are other gods, but they're not, that's who God is jealous of.
Yeah, they're not our God. Ours is the one. Yeah. I would refine what you said. So with the Judaism that Christianity has a trinity, would say you shall have no other gods but me. That's not where they would take issue with it. It's other things. This is like a whole year's worth of classes, just this one subject. But it's not that, because it is, we understand the same God we inherited. And then trying to make sense of, but what do we say that Jesus is also God? Jesus said that. How does that make sense? And what is this continuing presence of God in the world? We would say it's all God, not three different gods. And that's not what they would take issue with. They would take issue with saying the Messiah has come, because they don't believe that. Because the Messiah, Jesus, doesn't look like the Messiah they expect. A military, political, and a religious leader. Jesus is just a religious leader in that limited sense. And believing in resurrection. I'm going to a Jewish funeral on Tuesday. Interestingly, they don't have a set liturgy for a funeral, where they have a set liturgy for a lot of things. That really surprises me. What's our liturgy about a funeral? It does one specific thing. Have you ever noticed it? It's an Easter liturgy. The whole purpose, the root, the shape of it is usually Eucharist. It doesn't have to be. But it's proclaiming the resurrection faith and our participation in that. Because Jesus has been raised, we too shall be raised. And so there's readings and prayers that tell that story. And in Judaism, of course, that's not the story they're telling, that Jesus has been raised, so we shall. It's something else very, very different. And that resurrection and Jesus as Messiah, those are much bigger issues than different gods there. But some, I'm sure some are upset by that. Third commandment. This one also is often completely misunderstood by American Christians. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. So remember, this is called the book of Shemo, or names, Exodus. And the issue of identity is vital. The whole book is a story of people who were slaves or no identity to people who were somebody of identity in covenant relationship with Yahweh. And then a new king, Joseph is there and gets a name for himself within Egypt, and Pharaoh puts him as a number 2. They become a pretty popular group, tribe, within the kingdom of Egypt. And then years and years go by, and a new Pharaoh, a new king arises, and the story says his goal was to blot out the names of Joseph and his descendants. So again, back to the names thing of they don't even exist anymore. Let's write them out of history. We now call that what? To change history that everybody knew 5 minutes ago. Gaslighting. Or just rewriting history. No, there were no Jews here. That's what Pharaoh's trying to do. A name, particularly within Hebrew, does everybody know if your name does mean something, what it means? My name, Jonathon, Nathan is gives or gift. Yahweh gives is my name. There's a great scene in it's a Quentin Tarantino movie. My name's Butch. Names in America don't mean anything, but many names do. Abram, exalted father, becomes Abraham when he has a change of status, which means father of many nations. Moses means, anybody remember? From the water, delivered, he was in his little bushel basket, delivered there as mini ark. Jacob, remember what his name means? Supplanter, birthright stealer. Then he becomes Israel, where he's the one who wrestles with God. So then people are given names that mean something. Earlier in the book, God revealed the holy name to Moses. Well, who do I say I talk to? And Yahweh said, I'm Yahweh. I am who I am, or I'll be what I will be. The name, here's what it is. The name Yahweh occurs 6,828 times in the Old Testament. So every time it says God, it's usually Yahweh, or 2,800 times is Elohim. So those are the two main words. Always means the God of Israel. All of this is context for this third commandment. You will very often hear, what does this commandment mean in America? Don't take the Lord's name in vain.
Don't swear a false oath.
Don't swear a false oath. That's not what I heard as a kid. You can say, gosh darn it, but you can't say, God dang it, or worse. That's not what that means at all. But in the territory where I live, I won't say it, because I feel like that's one of the worst curse words you can say. That's how a lot of people interpret it, God dang it. No, it's not about protecting God. His ears are so delicate. You said a horrible cuss word. It's not cursing at all. It means a false oath. Every time, the very name, if you invoke Yahweh's name, this is a life and death experience. You would never misuse that. This is the one who you treated as sacred. How often do we throw the word God around and think of, when we say Yahweh, do Jews, many Jews write God a particular way. Have you ever seen such? G, usually a slash D. Because the name of God is so holy, you don't casually flip it around there. This means something, so pay attention to that. Sabbath, as a very similar function that we'll get to in just a few minutes, or a few weeks if I keep talking. Sabbath means you dedicate the entire 24-hour, 25-hour period to God alone. And it's very specific. You're not allowed to work, you can't walk this far, you can't light a fire, and you can't even pay somebody to do it for you, which is, you know how people are. Well, I'm not allowed to do this, so I will skirt the law and I will pay this guy to go do it for me, this foreigner. Nope, not even foreigners are allowed to work if they're in your territory. Darn it, I'll make my kids do it. Nope, not even your animals are allowed to work, so you're not tempted to say, well, my animals happens to be walking with a plow up and down the field. I need to walk with him. It shuts down everything. You can't mess around with this. This day belongs to God because of your covenant relationship. This is what you do. Don't ever misuse the name of God in any context, because this is sacred. Where in American life are we reminded of things that are sacred, if at all? Football, to some people, that's an excellent answer. Or basketball, college basketball right now in March Madness. We're told with signals something is sacred, or at least important. We would probably not use the term sacred as in really set apart, but within this context of Judaism, in the 10 foundational utterances or foundational principles of what it means to be a Jew, these things are the most important. These things matter. You hold this above all else. So all the particulars will follow, but you have to take one day off a week to focus on God. Never misuse God's name under any circumstances. Don't ever flirt with other gods under any circumstances. This is who we are. So it's just pounding the point home. Was there a comment? No. Say that again.
I've seen advertisements promoting the business using God's name or Jesus' name. I always get offended at that.
Yeah, I don't think God gets offended. God doesn't care, probably. I will, to jump back about envying your neighbor and stuff, the entire advertising industry is built on that. Envy, if it's not solely, but the primary constituent part of marketing or advertising. Don't you want to look young like this guy and drive this cool car? And you'll have these, everybody's young and beautiful in a beer commercial apparently. You want to be like these people? Don't you want this? It's all envy. That's how we push things, because it works. And so at the very beginning, you could say Yahweh, or at least the biblical writers of the story, knew that's how people have always been. Now, they didn't have all the fancy stuff, but, if you're looking around and he's got 4 wives, and one of them can cook, and one of them's darn good looking, and one of them, people think like everybody's a commodity. No, this is about relationship. Well, he's got a lot of nice sheep and goats and camels, and man, he's got a big tent. I wish I had a tent like that. And now it's the same thing. It's just a matter of scale. So from the beginning, they're pushing that. Did you have a question?
On Remember the Sabbath day, it doesn't mention the wife. Now, if you go forward to thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife. So this is kind of written from a male perspective. And why doesn't it say there you shouldn't work or your wife shouldn't?
You're talking about remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy?
Yeah, it doesn't say you or your wife, but it mentions on the thou shalt not covet, it mentions the neighbor's wife. So the woman
How much time do let me go straight into it. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. This is the longest commandment in the Decalogue. It's much more than the one-liner, but it lists all these specifics. Again, probably originally They were all very concise. 6 days you can work, the seventh is set aside. Remember, which the term is zakar, is emphatic imperative. Everybody remember this. It's what you'd say to your little kid's soccer team or your kid. Pay attention right now. I'll sometimes say, if you've not been listening to a thing I've said in the sermon, pay attention to this. Like, whoa, what? And this is, I'm about to hit you with the most important thing. Keep in mind, never forget. If you forget everything else, remember this thing. Why does this commandment need so many details? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
Were they looking for loopholes?
Looking for loopholes is a fantastic answer because it's probably not, if not the hardest, one of the hardest to keep because you're trying to find so many loopholes. All the ways I can get out of doing it. Just so we do that with all of them. But this, the book of Amos, the prophet, biblical book, Amos blasts all the greedy merchants because they couldn't wait for the Sabbath day to be over so they can mess with the scales again and screw people out of a little bit of money. They change the weights. They increase the cost of grain. They can skimp on the measure like, we can get them, but we can't do it on the Sabbath. It's awkward. So that's just awful. But who does that today? Does anybody price gouge? You remember how much money you had to pay for toilet paper in the pandemic at the beginning? If you could find it? Oh my gosh, or all this other. That's just how it works. How are we to remember the Sabbath? Shabbat. How do we remember it? What's the proper way? Keeping it holy. Setting it apart. Which is another way of saying, this matters more than anything else. The root of the word for Sabbath in Hebrew means rest or cease, stop. The Sabbath is a day to stop from one's normal routine because that belongs to Yahweh. The routine stopping is to be addressed without exception. You get, unless a person's life is in danger, mortal danger, then you can work. Like there's a story. If an animal falls in the well, are you allowed to save the animal? Yeah, you could do that. If a person falls in the well, yes, you can save them. But other than preserving a human life, you are not to work. So there's no Sabbath from Sabbath. Here's the word here, you, as individual. It's not a collective plural use. It's singular you. You, in this case, refers to men and women, but is a very good point you raise. And they're specific about that. You shall labor, addresses the individual, but all other possibilities are almost all are soon to be named. So you can't get out of, well, I'm not allowed to do it, but I'll have my servant or the animal or the foreigner. Notice foreigners after animals. Little awkward there, too. This is everyone. You can't pay someone to do your work for you. Probably this is the theological justification for reference in the creation account, and the Lord rested. Probably here's the commandment, and so they rewrote the Genesis account to reflect this is what we're doing now. So probably the Genesis account of the creation of the first day and so on the seventh day God rested. You look back and remember it in this way. Does that make sense? Okay. By the seventh day God finished the work and then he rested. These first 4 commandments shape and guide Israel's relationship with Yahweh. So it's a individual and corporate to Yahweh. And then the next 6 guide the relationship that Israelites are to have with other people, with other Jews, or Israelites specifically, as well as everybody else in the world. The first commandment is the one that shapes all the others, 2, 3, and 4 there, and then 5 through 10 that we'll get to. Because Yahweh is your God, therefore these other things also apply. That'll be 5 through 10. They originally fit on 2 tablets, is the story. And Moses came down the mountain. Have you ever done this with you? If you have or have had little kids, you're doing something and you come in and they've so completely wrecked what you're trying to do, or you're so terribly upset with them, you just drop what you're doing. Moses comes back with the 10 Commandments. He's probably all excited. I got them from Yahweh, and I'm going to share them. And he sees how naughty the people are being, and he smashes them on the ground. He's so upset. So he has to get a second set to make up for the first set. Probably 4 and 6, and these one-line phrases are on there. We'll stop there so we can take it up next week. Any last thoughts or questions about those? Excellent. Thank you very much.